There's a story in Buddhism about this woman who goes to the Buddha. She has lost her baby girl. She's died on her, and the woman is just devastated. And so she goes to the Buddha. This woman's name is Kisa Gotami. And she's heard that the Buddha has transcended death. And so she goes to the Buddha and she just begs him and begs and begs him, please, please, please restore my daughter to life. And the Buddha says that before he can do anything for her, she must go into the village and get a handful of mustard seeds. And they must come from a household that has never known death. And so the woman carrying her deceased baby, all wrapped up, goes into the village and she knocks on the first door she comes to, and she says, I have to have a handful of mustard seeds. I must have a handful of mustard seeds so that the Buddha can restore, my daughter to life. And they say, oh, we're happy to give you the mustard seeds. She says, oh, by the way, has anyone in your household ever known or experienced death? And then the gentleman of the household starts to tear up, and he says, well, yes, actually. He says, my father, who I was very, very close to, passed just a few weeks ago. And the woman says, oh, well, you keep the seeds. I've got to go to another house. And so she goes on to the next house, and then the next house, and the next house, and the next house, until she has gone to every house in this little village. And she comes back to the Buddha, who is in the forest, and together they bury her child. Because what she has found is that nobody was untouched. Nobody was untouched. Then, after burying her child, she asks the Buddha to teach her. Now, it's important to notice in the story that the Buddha did not say, oh, just don't think about it. Be happy. Be happy. It wasn't like that kind of denial. See, because, if you have grief in your life, it's important. That grief is actually a positive experience because it's how our psyche copes. That there's no shortcut. You have to go through what you have to go through. We know that, right? There's no shortcut to that. And so what he did was that he showed her a way to reach into her grief and see something that was larger than her own loss, right? Something that she could actually take refuge in, which is actually this idea that the universality of impermanence, that everything changes. And so through spiritual practice, because we meditate and because we pray and because we study and we work to have an expanded experience of consciousness, through spiritual practice, we can have a happiness and a fulfillment that's independent of external conditions. I got to say that again because I want to get that so badly. That we can, through spiritual practice, we can have a happiness and a fulfillment that's independent of external conditions. Because so many of us have thought that my happiness, my fulfillment is if somebody's in my life, or if they just get out of my life, or when I get this job, or when I get a better job, or when I buy a house, or all that. And so what we're saying is your happiness and fulfillment is not dependent on things outside of you, but how you will get there is through a spiritual practice. Now, everybody, and this is so of every person in this room, we've all already experienced different degrees of awakening. And so, the aim of Buddhism, the awakening is enlightenment. And so what we could ask ourselves today, and I know that there's some things for every person here, who and what awaken us to a greater intimacy with life? Who or what in our life right now awakens us to a greater intimacy with life? There was a couple here at church last week, and they were with their little grandbaby boy. And he's new, he's only a few months old, and he is just like the perfection of God incarnate. He's just, he's so new on the earth that he knows only that he deserves to be loved. Yeah, he's got that whole, love me going on. He knows he deserves it, and he knows the universe is just going to love him. That everybody's just going to come up and tell him how beautiful he is and kiss his head and, just want to touch him and tell him how gorgeous and wonderful he is, right? So in that couple's life, the grandparents' life, what awakens them to greater intimacy with life is this little grandson. And that little grandson is the Buddha, right? Because that's what wakes them up.